My name is Amber Lawson. I am 30 years old. And last month I watched my sister turn our grandmother's legacy into a shiny red mistake. We each inherited $100,000. I used mine to buy a little stability, a modest condo, an emergency fund, nothing flashy. My sister blew through hers in under a year and parked the evidence in front of her new rental like a trophy, a brand new Porsche loaded with every upgrade the dealership could push on her. She strutted around that car like she had beaten the system, throwing out a line about how easy life feels when you are rich, as if my discipline was some kind of joke. When the guests drifted back inside and the compliments slowed down, she finally showed me the real price of her dream, an insurance bill due in a few days, bigger than what she had left in her account. She did not ask me to help. She told me I would. In her head, that was my job. I was the responsible one, the boring one with the condo and the emergency fund, the built-in bailout for her decisions. An hour after I walked out of her housewarming party without agreeing to a thing, my mom sent one message that made everything very clear. Help your sister with the bill, or do not come home for the holidays. I read it twice, then I smiled, blocked them both, and went to bed. By morning, my phone showed 36 missed calls. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The night before my phone turned into a war zone, the housewarming party had already gone off script. Kelsey Lawson's rental sat in a row of nearly identical townhomes, but she had done everything she could to make hers stand out. String lights lined the small front porch, music pulsed from inside, and the new Porsche was angled across two parking spots like a prop in a commercial. Every time someone arrived, she steered the conversation back to the car. People asked about the neighborhood. She talked about horsepower. They complimented the decor. She mentioned the leather seats. I stayed near the food table, answering basic questions about work when people asked, watching the way Kelsey's eyes flicked to me whenever she emphasized the word upgrade. The car was not really about transportation. It was about proving she had moved into a different category of life, one where she imagined I did not belong. The first hint that something was off came when she started avoiding specifics. She told guests she had sorted out the finances, that she had everything handled, phrases that sounded rehearsed and flimsy. When one of her friends asked what insurance on a car like that cost, she laughed a little too loudly and changed the subject. I filed that away. I have spent enough time cleaning up other people's messes to recognize when someone is taping wrapping paper over a hole in the wall. Later, when the crowd thinned and the music dropped to a background hum, she finally made her move. She slipped between two chatting coworkers, took my elbow, and guided me toward the kitchen with a smile that never reached her eyes. The counters were crowded with disposable pans and half-empty bottles, the kind of chaos that comes with hosting. But she made space at the end of the island and set her phone down between us like it was evidence. On the screen was an email from her insurance company. I did not need to read every line to understand the problem. The numbers were large, the due date was close, and the tone of the message was not friendly. It was the kind of bill you feel in your chest, the kind that makes the room slightly smaller. Kelsey tapped the screen with one manicured finger and said she just needed a little help to get through this first stretch, that once things evened out, she would be fine. She spoke like we were partners in her decision, like this was a shared project instead of the result of months of impulsive spending I had never agreed to fund. She listed her upgrades almost proudly: performance package, custom wheels, premium sound. Each feature had felt like a victory swipe at the dealership. Now they sat there as line items tied to reality. While she talked, I did the silent math I always do. I considered my mortgage, the emergency fund I had built slowly, the plans I had for that money. I pictured handing over a chunk of it to erase the consequences of someone else's choices one more time. There was a familiar pressure in my chest, that old reflex to step in, solve it, keep the peace for the sake of the family. This time, the feeling did not settle the way it used to. It turned into something colder and clearer. I realized that if I said yes now, this would not be a one-time favor. It would be the beginning of a new pattern built around her car, her image, her refusal to adjust to reality. The inheritance might be gone, but the expectation that I would keep fueling the fantasy would not disappear with it. I looked up from the phone and told her I was not going to cover the bill. I did not offer a partial amount or a payment plan. I did not apologize or pad it with excuses. I simply said no and let the words sit between us. For a second, she did not react. Then her expression shifted, the brightness slipping just enough to show what was underneath. She pulled the phone back, jaw tight, and I could see the story already forming in her head. I was the villain for refusing to rescue her, not the person who had tried to live a sports car lifestyle on a budget that could not support it. She walked away before I could say anything else, back into the cluster of guests, her laugh louder than before. The party kept going. Conversation flowed. Someone turned the music up again. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside that kitchen, for me, everything already had. I went home early. The drive back to my condo felt strangely quiet, like the sound had been turned down on someone else's life. I parked in my usual spot, the one nobody ever fights over, and sat there with my hands still on the steering wheel. My sister had just tried to turn my savings into a patch for her Porsche problem, and for once I had not stepped into the role everyone expected. Inside, I dropped my keys in the dish by the door and opened my banking app out of pure habit. The numbers staring back at me were not huge by any stretch, but they were mine, built slowly over years of saying no to things I could have easily justified. Every line in that account represented some little sacrifice I had made for myself, not for Kelsey. That used to be different. For most of my 20s, any time she hit a rough patch, I felt it in my balance. I covered a missed utility bill when her roommate bailed on her. I paid a security deposit when she got excited about a new apartment and did not have enough saved. I sent a few $100s here and there when she swore she would pay me back after the next raise that never came. None of those checks bounced. My boundaries did. I did not realize how deep that pattern ran until my phone lit up on the counter. A new text from my mother appeared, her name filling the screen. I wiped my hand on a dish towel before I reached for it, as if the message were something physical I needed a better grip on. She did not ask how the party went. She did not ask if I had made it home safely. She sent one tidy sentence telling me to take care of Kelsey's insurance bill if I wanted a place at the holiday table. No softening, no question mark, just a condition dressed up as family tradition. I stared at the screen long enough for the backlight to dim. My first instinct was the old one. Start crafting a careful response, explain my side, try to make her understand that I was not the one who had created this mess. I even opened the keyboard and typed a few words before deleting them. I could already hear the reply in my head, the familiar phrases about loyalty and sacrifice, the reminder that Kelsey had always struggled, the implication that my stability was some kind of hoarded privilege. Something about that prediction made the choice easier. If I already knew the script, there was no reason to perform my part again. Instead of answering, I opened my contact settings. My mother's name sat there, tied to years of late-night calls and urgent requests that always seemed to land on my shoulders. I hovered over the options for a few seconds, then tapped the one I had never used with her before. The confirmation prompt appeared, stark and simple. I pressed it and watched her name slide out of the active list. Kelsey's contact followed. Her thread was a scroll of selfies, links to sales, and occasional panicked messages when her account dipped too low. I remembered every time I had rushed to smooth things over, to keep her from feeling the discomfort that had taught me how to live within my limits. This time, I did not scroll. I just removed the option for her to bypass my decisions with another crisis. Finally, I opened the family group chat, the one that always lit up during game days and holidays, the one where Diane's comments framed everything as we, even when we meant Amber will handle it. My thumb hesitated over the exit button, not because I doubted the decision, but because of what it symbolized. Leaving that chat meant stepping out of a role I had been assigned for as long as I could remember. I thought about my father, Ronald, sitting in his chair while my mother narrated every situation like it was settled law. I could picture the next holiday, my name showing up as a topic instead of a person. The story edited so that my refusal sounded like cruelty, and their demands sounded like love. For a second, I felt the familiar tug of wanting to control that narrative, to stay connected just enough to correct it. I left anyway. The apartment did not get louder or brighter when I did it. Nothing dramatic happened. The only immediate change was the stillness around my phone. I set it face down on the counter, turned off the kitchen light, and let the quiet finally belong to me. The quiet the night gave me did not survive sunrise. My phone started buzzing before I even turned off my alarm. At first, I assumed it was a calendar alert or a spam call, something I could ignore for a few extra minutes of sleep. When I rolled over and saw the notification list, the shape of my day changed. Missed calls stacked in a column, all from the same familiar numbers. Voicemails waited in a neat little row beneath them, badges lined up like warnings. I sat up, spine tight, and scrolled through the call log. My sister's number appeared again and again, time-stamped every few minutes from late evening until after midnight. My mother's number was woven between them, a pattern of reinforcement. A couple of calls had come from the house landline, which meant my father was in the room while this campaign was happening, even if his own contact never lit up on the screen. For a while, I just stared. There was a version of me that would have called back immediately, tried to smooth things over before they hardened into something permanent. That version had walked away with me the night before when I tapped the block option and refused to step back into the same cycle. I was not interested in hearing another lecture about loyalty disguised as concern. Curiosity eventually won over caution. I did not call anyone, but I did open the voicemail tab. The messages loaded in a long list. I pressed play on the first one and let it run on speaker while I moved around my kitchen. My sister's voice filled the room, bright at the edges and sharp in the middle. She sounded annoyed more than anything, like my refusal had been an inconvenience, not a boundary. She talked about how easy it would be for me to fix this, how little it would cost me compared to what it meant for her. She did not mention the car by name, only the situation, as if being vague would make it sound less like the direct result of her choices. The next message came from my mother, Diane. Her tone clipped. She skipped over any acknowledgement of how she had phrased her demand the night before. Instead, she framed everything as a misunderstanding, accusing me of overreacting before I had said a single word. She repeated that family steps up, that Kelsey was under a lot of pressure, that I was in the best position to help. The words were different, but the meaning was the same. Give in. As the messages went on, the tone shifted. Annoyance moved into indignation, then into hurt, then into something closer to panic. Later voicemails carried the sound of my mother's voice cracking at the edges, a practiced cry that had worked on me more times than I wanted to admit. My father's voice appeared once, low and tired, asking me to call my mother because she was upset. He did not mention the insurance bill. He did not ask what had happened at the party. He only asked me to fix the emotional mess she was sitting in. None of them asked me if I was all right. Somewhere around the 10th voicemail, a new number appeared. The message came from my cousin, Bethany Price, who rarely texted me unless there was a group event or a shared birthday planning to handle. She started with small talk, calling me busy in a way that sounded like a criticism, then eased into the real purpose of her call. My mother had told her I was being difficult, She wanted to hear my side, but every sentence bent toward the same conclusion, that it would be simpler for everyone if I just covered the bill and moved on. By the time I reached the end of the list, I had heard anger, guilt, bargaining, and a version of concern that had nothing to do with my well-being. No one wanted to know why I had drawn a line. They only wanted to know when I would cross it again for their comfort. I deleted each voicemail after I listened, watching the badges disappear one by one. Then I went into my settings and closed the gaps I had left open the night before. I blocked my parents' house number. I blocked Bethany's number. I set my phone to silence unknown callers and tightened my privacy on every app I could think of. The calls had used to mean urgency, danger, something I needed to rush toward. Now they were just alarms I did not owe an answer. The next attempt to reach me did not arrive as a notification. Saturday afternoon, I pulled into my usual spot, thinking only about getting the groceries upstairs. When I rounded the corner, the Porsche was waiting at the curb outside my building like a red flag I had already decided not to salute. It looked even more ridiculous against peeling paint and dented sedans than it had at the housewarming. Kelsey leaned against the hood, phone in hand, dressed like she was heading to a photo shoot. Diane stood a few feet away, arms folded, eyes moving over the balconies and walkways the way she always did when she sensed an audience. They were not here to talk. They were here to stage something. There was nothing accidental about it. They had guessed my errand schedule or sat out there until I came home. Neighbors moved around us with laundry baskets and grocery bags, slowing just enough to take in the scene. My mother's shoulders lifted the moment she registered their attention, and I knew this was exactly the setting she wanted. I could have turned back to the car, driven off, pretended not to see them. Instead, I walked toward my stairwell at the same steady pace I used at work when someone tried to corner me in the hallway. Kelsey pushed off the hood and stepped into my path, spreading her arms just wide enough that I would have had to brush past her to keep going. They started talking at the same time. I did not catch every word, and I did not need to. My mother reached for the familiar language of duty and sacrifice. Kelsey focused on how hard everything suddenly was now that the real numbers had arrived. She never said insurance, but every detail pointed straight at the bill she had tried to slide across the kitchen island. I let them talk long enough to understand the strategy. They wanted this to look like a rescue I was selfishly withholding. If I raised my voice, I would be the aggressive one. If I walked away, I would be the cold one. If I caved, they would reframe it as me, finally coming to my senses, and ignore the way they had cornered me at my own front door. Realizing that made the choice simple. I shifted the grocery bag higher on my hip and spoke once, calmly. I told them I was not discussing their finances in the parking lot, that I had heard everything I needed to hear, and that they needed to leave my building. For a heartbeat, there was actual silence. Diane looked stunned, as if someone had turned down the volume on a channel she had always controlled. Kelsey's expression flickered from shock to anger so quickly it almost blended together. Then the noise rushed back. They accused me of humiliating them, of making a scene, of ignoring family in front of strangers, as if they had not come here specifically to create a scene. I did not explain myself. I stepped around Kelsey, walked to the stairs, and climbed without looking back. Their voices followed partway up, bouncing off the concrete and metal railings, then thinned out as I reached my door. The lock slid into place under my hand with a small, solid sound that felt more satisfying than any argument I could have won. Inside, I set the grocery bag on the counter and put everything away slowly. The movement helped bleed off the adrenaline. My hands shook just enough to remind me that confrontation, even quiet confrontation, carries a physical cost. I let myself feel it without second-guessing the decision that caused it. Hours later, after the building had settled into its usual evening hush, my phone buzzed once. A text from an unfamiliar number appeared with a simple introduction. The sender was Trevor Cole. The man Kelsey had been seeing seriously. He said he knew things were strained, that he did not want to step into family business, but he also could not pretend the car and the stress around it were not spilling into his own plans. He did not ask me to pay anything. He did not suggest a compromise. He wrote that he understood why someone might be tired of being treated like a safety net, and that he hoped, for everyone's sake, Kelsey would start taking responsibility. I appreciated that someone close to her could see what I saw. I still did not answer. The boundary I had drawn was not a temporary mood. It was the new shape of my life. Weeks passed without another surprise appearance in my parking lot, but the fallout from the Porsche did not slow down just because I refused to step into it. The first wave of consequences showed up in the form of envelopes. I did not see them in Kelsey's mailbox, but I heard about them through people who were still invited into the family's version of events. An aunt mentioned a lot of mail from the insurance company during a casual call with someone I trusted. A cousin let slip that Kelsey had complained about threatening letters over lunch. None of those comments were meant for me, but they reached me anyway, like secondhand smoke drifting under a door. I understood what those letters probably said. Insurance does not beg. It warns, then it acts. Missed payments turn into cancellation notices. Cancellation notices turn into gaps in coverage. Gaps in coverage on a luxury car turn into a problem with whatever lender signed off on the deal. It was a chain reaction built into the system, and they had assumed I would snap my fingers in the middle of it and stop everything from reaching them. When that did not happen, the story they told shifted. Kelsey could not say she had no idea this might happen. She had been given the terms in writing. Diane could not pretend she did not know how expensive that car would be to maintain. She had bragged about it too many times. So they moved to a version that made my refusal the central problem, instead of a missing safety feature they had counted on. The next round of outreach did not mention the car at all. My mother sent a message from a different number, framed as a simple update. Groceries had gotten more expensive. Utilities kept climbing. Everything cost more, she said, and it was getting difficult to keep up. She never wrote Kelsey's name, but it did not take much effort to understand why their household budget had suddenly become so fragile. I sat at my kitchen table with that message glowing on the screen and thought about how many times "we are struggling" had really meant Kelsey has overextended herself again. I thought about how my contributions had always been folded into the same vague category: help, support, family pulling together. I had never once seen a separate column for responsibility. If I sent anything now, it would not go towards some shapeless emergency. It would be swallowed by the same car payment and insurance hole I had already declined to fill. The path from my account to that bill would only be slightly longer. I did not respond to my mother's message. I did not ask follow-up questions or offer a smaller amount to ease my conscience. Instead, I scrolled to the number she was using and shut that door the way I had closed the others. There was no satisfaction in it, just a clean kind of relief. Information still found its way to me. Coworkers who were friends with Kelsey on social media mentioned vague posts about being betrayed by people who should have your back. A neighbor who still spoke to my parents mentioned that Diane had started selling small things around the house, claiming she wanted to declutter while she quietly looked for quick cash. None of them asked me if the posts were about me. They already knew. Every detail lined up with the pattern I had chosen to step out of. The money they had expected from me had simply been rerouted into crisis instead of prevention. Late fees multiplied, interest stacked, calls from unknown numbers increased. Each time my phone buzzed with a new contact I did not recognize, I watched it fade to missed call and let it stay that way. Trevor's name came up once in a conversation with someone outside the family. He had started asking more pointed questions about the car, about the loan, about who was actually responsible for which bills. Kelsey did not like those questions. It is hard to keep insisting that life is easy when you are rich, while the bank keeps reminding you you are not. Through all of it, my life stayed ordinary in the best possible way. I went to work. I paid my mortgage. I bought my own groceries without wondering if a payment would bounce. The quiet around my finances felt almost radical compared to the escalating noise surrounding theirs. The distance did not solve their problems, but it kept their problems from swallowing me, and that distinction mattered more than anything they were saying about me in rooms I no longer walked into. By the time summer pressed in, the distance between my life and theirs had stopped feeling temporary. It was simply how things were. News about the Porsche reached me sideways. A coworker who still followed my sister online mentioned a photo that flashed across her feed and then vanished. A red sports car tilted on the back of a tow truck, straps over the wheels, caption gone. I did not need the words. A few days later, an unfamiliar number sent the same scene directly to my phone. This time, the truck was parked in front of my parents' house. No text, no context, just the image. Whoever sent it wanted the picture to carry blame. I let the screen go dark in my hand and set the phone face down on the table. The car was never the real problem, but its removal was a clear line. A lender somewhere had decided this story was no longer worth the risk. The bill I refused to carry had stayed where it belonged. Other fragments drifted in without my asking. Someone mentioned my mother talking about rebuilding their finances. Someone else said Kelsey's name with the kind of sigh you use when you are tired of defending a grown adult. I did not go looking for more detail. In this country, repossession and missed payments come back as higher rates and closed doors. One evening, another unknown number sent a longer text. This one signed with my father's name. He wrote that things were difficult at home, that my mother was under pressure, that my sister was struggling. He said he missed me and wished things could go back to how they were. He did not mention the ultimatum, the parking lot ambush, or the months of pressure that had led me to walk away. There was a small part of me that wanted to carve out a side door just for him, a channel where we could talk without dragging everything else through. But there are no side doors in a house running on the same rules. As long as he stood inside them, any path I opened would become another entry point for the pattern I had already chosen to leave. I answered him once, briefly. I said I did not hate him. I said I hoped he and my mother would find a way forward that did not depend on me paying for their choices. Then I wrote the part that mattered most. I would not be coming back. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, not for emergencies built on decisions I did not make. A week later, I changed my number. It took a few minutes and a short hold with my provider. I gave the new one only to people who had shown they could treat my time and attention like something with value. For everyone else, the calls simply stopped connecting. The silence that followed did not feel like exile. It felt like finally living inside the walls I had needed for years. Life did not turn cinematic. It turned ordinary. I checked my balance without bracing for someone else's crisis. I answered my door without wondering who might be waiting with a problem they had already decided belonged to me. I made plans that did not include leaving room for chaos I could not control. Bits of their story still floated by. I heard that my mother stopped saying my name out loud, as if skipping the word could erase the history behind it. I heard that my sister moved into a smaller place and now drove something older and forgettable, with a payment that matched the credit report she had earned. None of that made me happy. It just confirmed what I had already understood. Consequences do not vanish because you decide someone else should have carried them. The real shift happened inside my own thinking. I stopped framing refusal as betrayal. I stopped measuring love by how much damage I was willing to absorb. I started asking a different first question whenever anyone hinted that I owed them more than was safe for me to give. Not, what will they say about me if I refuse? But, what happens to my life if I agree? If there is anything here worth keeping, it is that question. You cannot force people to spend wisely or treat you fairly. You cannot rewrite the story they tell about you when you are not in the room. You can decide where your energy, money, and peace are no longer available. My sister spent $100,000 of inheritance on a car and tried to hand me the bill when reality arrived. My family told me that saying no meant stepping outside of love. What I finally learned is that love without boundaries is not love. It is access with a nice name. If this made you pause and look at your own lines a little differently, thank you for staying with me. Take care of the part of your life no one else can live for you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, you are welcome to come back.